If you're so smart, why are you still broke? The words hit me like a slap across a face I'd forgotten how to protect. My own daughter's voice, dripping with scorn, echoed through the cramped living room of my tiny Manhattan apartment. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I am Margaret. I am 78 years old. I wear the same faded blue cardigan every morning because it still smells faintly of the lavender detergent I splurge on once a month. My fingers trace the worn fabric as I stand before my kitchen window, watching the blur of yellow taxis and hurried pedestrians 22 floors below. The city never sleeps, and neither do I anymore. Not really. My apartment is a studio on the Upper West Side. Rent-controlled, thank God, but barely big enough for a twin bed, a kitchenette smaller than most closets, and a table that wobbles when I set down my morning coffee. The walls are thin enough that I hear Mrs. Chen arguing with her son in Mandarin next door, and the college students above me playing music until 3 in the morning. But it's mine. Or at least, it was supposed to be. This morning started like every other. My alarm clock, the same reliable West clocks I've had for 30 years, buzzed at 5:15. Before dawn. Before the city fully wakes. I shuffled to the bathroom, my slippers making that familiar whisper against the hardwood floor. In the mirror, I saw what everyone else sees, an old woman with silver hair that refuses to hold a curl, deep lines around green eyes that used to sparkle, and shoulders that seem to curve inward as if I'm trying to disappear. But I don't see what I used to see. I don't see the woman who raised a daughter alone in the city. I don't see the hands that worked 3 jobs to pay for dance lessons and summer camps. I don't see the heart that forgave every cruel word, every slammed door, every forgotten birthday. All I see is what my daughter sees, a burden. The phone rang at 7:30. It always rings at 7:30. Never earlier, never later. As predictable as the subway schedule. Mom? Jessica's voice carried that familiar edge of impatience. Did you remember to transfer the money for Emma's violin lessons? Emma is my granddaughter. 12 years old with Jessica's stubborn chin and her father's hollow eyes. I love her fiercely, desperately, the way you love something you're afraid you might lose. The violin lessons cost $200 a month. My social security check is $863. Do the math. I'll do it today, I said, already reaching for my worn checkbook on the kitchen table. Between bills threatening disconnection and a checkbook that shows more red than black, I somehow always find the money. I always do. Good. And Mom? Don't forget dinner Sunday. Tom's parents are coming. Tom is Jessica's husband. A man who looks through me like I'm made of glass. His parents treat me like hired help who speaks too loudly and stays too long. Should I bring something? I asked, knowing the answer. Just yourself. The line went quiet for a moment. Actually, could you maybe make that rice thing you do? The one with the saffron? It's expensive when we order it. The rice pilaf. My mother's recipe. The one I taught Jessica when she was 8, standing on a kitchen chair so she could reach the stove. She used to call it Grandma Rose's magic rice and beg me to make it for her birthday every year. Now it's just something convenient I can bring to justify my presence at their table. Of course, sweetheart, I said. The endearment felt rusty in my mouth. After she hung up, I sat at my table staring at the stack of envelopes that never seems to shrink. Electric bill, overdue. Phone bill, final notice. Medical bills from my heart medication that the insurance only covers partially. And underneath it all, bank statements I can't bear to open. Because I know what they'll say. I know what my kindness has cost me. The truth is, I haven't bought myself new clothes in 2 years. The truth is, I eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner most nights because meat is too expensive. The truth is, I gave Jessica the down payment for her apartment in Brooklyn, and I've been paying her car insurance for 3 years because it's just temporary, Mom, until we get on our feet. But I don't say these things. I don't say them because a mother's love isn't supposed to come with receipts. A mother's love isn't supposed to have limits or boundaries or expiration dates. A mother's love is supposed to be infinite, unconditional, unbreakable. Even when it's killing you. I spent that morning like I spend every morning. Stretching my social security check like taffy, trying to make it cover everything it was never meant to cover. I called the electric company and negotiated another extension. I sorted my pills into a weekly container, counting them twice because I can't afford to waste even one. I made a grocery list that consisted mostly of generic brands and marked down produce. By noon, I was exhausted. Not from physical work, but from the mental gymnastics of survival. From the constant calculation of what I can afford, what I can't, what I can put off until next month. From the weight of being needed and resented in equal measure. I decided to walk to the grocery store instead of taking the bus. Not because I wanted the exercise, but because $2.75 saved is $2.75 I can put toward Emma's violin lessons. The November air was sharp against my cheeks, and I pulled my cardigan tighter as I navigated the sidewalks crowded with people who moved with purpose and urgency I no longer possessed. In the grocery store, I found myself standing in front of the saffron, staring at the small glass jar that cost more than I spend on groceries in a week. But Jessica was expecting her rice dish. Jessica was counting on me. Jessica would notice if it wasn't quite right, wouldn't she? The cashier, a young man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Marcus, smiled at me as he rang up my meager purchases. "Having a party?" he asked, nodding toward the saffron. "Family dinner," I said, and something in my voice must have given me away because his expression softened. "That's nice. Nothing better than cooking for people you love. People you love who don't love you back," I thought. But I just smiled and counted out exact change from my coin purse while the line of impatient customers grew behind me. The walk home felt longer than usual. My canvas shopping bag cut into my shoulder, and my feet ached in shoes that were fashionable 15 years ago. I climbed the 4 flights to my apartment because the elevator was broken again, pausing on each landing to catch my breath. Mrs. Chen peered out her door as I passed, offering her usual worried smile. "You okay, Margaret?" she asked in her careful English. "Fine, just tired," I lied. That afternoon, I began preparing the rice pilaf. I washed each grain carefully, the way my mother taught me, the way I taught Jessica. I toasted the almonds and ground the saffron with sugar, breathing in the familiar aroma that always transported me back to Sunday dinners at my mother's table. Before my father died. Before everything changed. My mother, Rose, was a woman who could make magic out of leftovers and love out of nothing. She raised 4 children during the Depression, and I never once heard her complain about money or sacrifice or the endless, thankless work of keeping a family fed and whole. She would have been appalled by my situation. Not the poverty, she understood poverty. But the way my generosity had become an expectation, my love a transaction. By evening, the rice was perfect. Golden and fragrant, studded with almonds and dried fruit, still warm from the stove. I packed it carefully in my good serving bowl, the one with the tiny chip in the rim that I've been meaning to replace for years. I wrapped it in tea towels and placed it gently in my carry bag, along with serving spoons and a small container of extra saffron rice in case there wasn't enough. The subway ride to Brooklyn was crowded with families heading out for Saturday evening dinners, couples dressed for dates, groups of friends laughing and planning their nights out. I sat in my corner seat, holding my bag carefully on my lap, watching all these people who belonged somewhere. Who were wanted somewhere. Who weren't showing up to family dinner like an obligation to be endured. Jessica and Tom's apartment building is one of those new constructions with a doorman and a marble lobby that makes my shoes squeak against the polished floor. The doorman knows me by now, the old woman who comes bearing food like an offering to gods who might not accept her sacrifice. I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, my reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls. 7 versions of an old woman in a faded cardigan, holding a bowl of rice like it might save her from drowning. Jessica answered the door wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her hair was professionally styled, her makeup flawless. She looked beautiful and successful and nothing like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Oh good, you brought the rice," she said, taking the bowl from my hands before I was fully through the door. Not, "Hello, Mom." Not, "How are you?" Not, "Thank you for spending money you don't have to make something I requested." Just an acknowledgement that I had fulfilled my function. The apartment was warm and bright, filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. Tom's parents were already there, seated in the living room with glasses of wine that probably cost more than my weekly food budget. Emma was at the piano in the corner, practicing scales with the focused concentration that reminded me so much of Jessica at that age. Margaret, Tom's mother, Linda, waved from her position on the cream-colored sofa. "So nice to see you again." Linda has the kind of perfectly maintained appearance that comes from regular facials and monthly hair appointments. She wears jewelry that catches the light and makes soft musical sounds when she moves. She's kind to me in the way people are kind to service workers, polite, distant, slightly condescending. "Hello, Linda. How are you feeling?" I asked, remembering that she'd mentioned some minor health issue during our last encounter. "Oh, much better, thank you for asking. Though I do think this November weather is just dreadful for my joints." She flexed her fingers, which were adorned with rings that probably cost more than my annual income. I nodded sympathetically, though my own joints ached constantly now, and I couldn't afford the physical therapy my doctor recommended. I made my way to the kitchen where Jessica was already transferring my rice into one of her matching serving dishes. "It looks perfect," she said, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the daughter I remembered. The one who used to hug me tight and tell me I was the best cook in the world. "I'm glad," I said. "Is there anything else I can help with?" "No, we've got everything handled. Why don't you go sit down? Dinner will be ready in a few minutes." I found myself on the edge of the conversation circle, perched on the uncomfortable dining room chair that creaked every time I shifted. Tom's father, Robert, was holding court about his recent promotion at the law firm. Tom was discussing some business deal with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never worried about making rent. Linda was showing Emma pictures on her phone of the vacation home they'd just purchased in the Hamptons. I tried to contribute to the conversation, but my worlds felt small and insignificant compared to theirs. What could I add? That I'd successfully negotiated another month's extension on my phone bill? That I'd found ground beef on sale for $2 less per pound? That I'd finally fixed the leak under my kitchen sink with a YouTube tutorial and a prayer? Dinner was served on Jessica's wedding china, the set I'd helped her register for 7 years ago when I still believed I'd always have a place at her table. The rice looked beautiful in her serving dish, and I felt a small spark of pride when everyone complimented it. Even Tom, who rarely acknowledged my existence, said it was really quite good. But as the meal progressed, I began to notice the subtle ways I was excluded from the family narrative. When they talked about Emma's upcoming school play, no one mentioned whether I'd be invited. When they discussed Thanksgiving plans, my presence seemed assumed rather than welcomed. When Tom's parents talked about gifts they were planning for Emma's birthday, no one asked for my input. I was there, but I wasn't really there. I was a ghost at my own family's table, visible only when they needed something from me. After dinner, Emma played violin for us. She's gotten so much better since those early lessons I've been paying for. Her technique is improving, her confidence growing. She played a piece by Bach, her small fingers moving precisely across the strings, her bow drawing out notes that filled the room with something approaching magic. "She's really gifted," Linda said to Jessica, as if I weren't sitting right there. "You should think about private lessons with someone more advanced." "We're already looking into it," Tom replied. "There's a teacher at Juilliard who takes a few select students. Very expensive, but probably worth it for Emma's development." Very expensive. I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming. "Mom," Jessica said after her in-laws had left and Emma had been sent to her room to do homework. "We need to talk about Emma's music education." I sat back down at the dining room table, my hands folded in my lap like a child waiting to be scolded. "The Juilliard teacher charges $500 per lesson," Tom said, not meeting my eyes. "We think it would be a great investment in Emma's future." $500 per lesson. I made a quick calculation in my head. That was more than half my monthly income. That was groceries for 6 weeks. That was my medication for 3 months. "It's just temporary," Jessica added quickly. "Until Tom's business really takes off. You know how grateful we are for everything you do for Emma." Grateful. The word felt hollow, meaningless. If they were truly grateful, would they ask me to choose between my granddaughter's music lessons and my own survival? But what choice did I have? Emma was innocent in all this. Emma loved music the way I once loved painting, before life convinced me that art was a luxury I couldn't afford. How could I be the one to take that away from her? How often would the lessons be? I asked, though I already knew I'd find a way to make it work. I always found a way. "Once a week," Tom said. "At least to start. $2,000 a month. More than twice my Social Security check. I would have to. I didn't even know what I'd have to do. Cancel my phone? Stop buying my heart medication? Move to a smaller apartment, if such a thing even existed in New York? I'll see what I can do," I heard myself saying. Jessica's face lit up with relief. "You're the best, Mom. Emma is so lucky to have you as her grandmother." Lucky? Yes, Emma was lucky to have a grandmother who would bankrupt herself for her future. But who was I lucky to have? As I prepared to leave, Jessica walked me to the door. For a moment, I thought she might say something, acknowledge the enormity of what she was asking. Instead, she kissed my cheek with the same casual affection you'd show a helpful neighbor. "Thanks for dinner, Mom. The rice was perfect as always." The subway ride home passed in a blur of calculation and growing panic. $2,000 a month on top of the $200 I was already paying. Plus the car insurance. Plus the occasional emergencies that somehow always became my responsibility. Plus the birthday gifts and Christmas presents and school supplies and dance costumes and everything else that being a good grandmother supposedly required. I let myself into my apartment and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of unpaid bills. Under the harsh fluorescent light, everything looked shabbier than usual. The worn linoleum. The scratched furniture. The photo frames holding pictures of people who saw me as an ATM with arms. That's when I saw it. The bank statement I'd been avoiding, tucked between a credit card offer and a flyer for a local senior center. I opened it with trembling fingers, already knowing it would be worse than I feared. My checking account balance, $47.32. My savings account balance, 0. The savings account was empty. Completely empty. $300,000 that my husband had left me when he died, money I'd been carefully managing for 15 years to ensure I'd never be a burden to anyone. Gone. Every penny of it transferred over the past 2 years to Jessica's account for various emergencies that never seemed to end. I sat in the dark for a long time that night, listening to the city sounds filtering through my thin walls. Sirens and car horns and the distant rumble of the subway. The sounds of a city full of people who had someplace to go, someone who wanted them there, a life that made sense. How had I become this person? This hollow version of myself who existed only to serve others? When had my love become indistinguishable from my bank account? I thought about my mother, Rose, and what she would say if she could see me now. She'd raised 4 children without ever making any of us feel like we owed her our souls in exchange for her sacrifices. She'd loved us fiercely but not desperately. She'd prepared us for independence, not dependence. Somewhere along the way, I'd confused love with martyrdom. I'd taught Jessica that my worth was measured by my willingness to empty my pockets for her convenience. I'd trained her to see me not as a person with needs and dreams and limitations, but as a resource to be managed. And now I was broke. 78 years old and broke. Living on Social Security in a studio apartment, wearing the same clothes year after year, eating peanut butter sandwiches while paying for violin lessons that cost more than some people's rent. The worst part wasn't the money, though. The worst part was the realization that I had bought my daughter's tolerance, not her love. That every dollar I'd given her had somehow made her respect me less, not more. That in trying to be the perfect mother, I'd become the invisible woman. I made myself a cup of tea with a bag I'd already used once that morning, and sat by my window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were living authentic lives. Making choices based on their values, not their fears. Setting boundaries. Saying no. Being loved for who they were, not what they could provide. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine what that might feel like. The next morning, Sunday, I woke before my alarm again. But instead of immediately calculating how I'd make ends meet for another month, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stayed in bed. I pulled my thin blanket up to my chin and watched the sunrise paint my ceiling in shades of pink and gold. I had made a decision in the dark hours of the night. I was going to start saying no. Not to Emma, who was an innocent child caught in the middle of adult dysfunction, but to the endless financial requests that had left me choosing between my medication and my granddaughter's music lessons. To the assumption that my bank account was a family resource with no bottom. To the idea that love required me to disappear entirely as a person. The phone rang at 7:30, as always. "Mom?" Jessica's voice carried its usual impatience. "I forgot to ask yesterday, can you cover Emma's school trip this week? It's $200, and we're a little tight right now." I stared at my bank statement on the table. $47.32. "I can't," I said. The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "What do you mean you can't?" Jessica's voice had sharpened. "I mean I don't have the money," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign. I had never said those words to her before. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. It's just $200. Just $200. More than I spent on food in a month. Nearly half my remaining bank balance. Jessica, I need to tell you something. I don't have any money left. I'm broke." Another long silence. Then, "What are you talking about? You have Dad's life insurance money." "Had," I corrected. "I had that money. I've given it all to you over the past 2 years. Every penny of it." "That's impossible. I can show you the bank statements." "But," her voice trailed off, and for the first time in years, Jessica seemed genuinely speechless. "I thought you wanted to help." "I did want to help. I do want to help. But I can't help anymore because there's nothing left to give." "So what am I supposed to do about Emma's trip?" "Not, I'm sorry, Mom. Not, I had no idea. Not, thank you for everything you've already done." Just immediate panic about what this meant for her own convenience. "I don't know," I said. "But I can't solve it for you." Jessica hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the aftermath of that conversation feeling like I'd just jumped out of an airplane without knowing if my parachute would open. Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Within an hour, my phone was ringing again. This time it was Tom. "Margaret, Jessica is really upset," he began without preamble. She says you're refusing to help with Emma's school activities. I'm not refusing to help, Tom. I'm unable to help. There's a difference. Look, I understand money might be tight for you, but we're talking about Emma's education here. Her opportunities. Surely you can see that's worth some sacrifice. Some sacrifice. As if I hadn't been sacrificing for years. As if I hadn't already given away my financial security, my peace of mind, my sense of self-worth. Tom, I said carefully, I've already sacrificed everything I have. My savings are gone. I'm living on Social Security and choosing between groceries and medication. I can't sacrifice anymore because there's literally nothing left. Well, then maybe you need to look at downsizing your lifestyle. Move somewhere cheaper. Cut some expenses. Cut some expenses. I was already cutting expenses down to the bone. I was already living in the smallest apartment I could find. I was already wearing clothes until they fell apart and eating the cheapest food I could buy. Tom, I'm living as cheaply as I possibly can. The problem isn't my lifestyle. The problem is that I've been giving away money I couldn't afford to give. Jesus, Margaret. You make it sound like we've been taking advantage of you. The pause stretched between us, loaded with the truth neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I have to go, I said, and hung up. The rest of that Sunday passed in a strange kind of silence. My phone didn't ring. No one knocked on my door. For the first time in years, no one needed anything from me, and the quiet felt both terrifying and liberating. I spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in decades, nothing. I sat by my window and watched the world go by without feeling responsible for fixing anyone's problems or financing anyone's dreams. I made myself lunch, a proper lunch with vegetables I hadn't bought because they were on sale, and ate it slowly, tasting every bite. In the evening, I called Mrs. Chen and asked if she'd like to share a cup of tea. She arrived with homemade dumplings and a worried expression. You seem different today, she said as we sat at my small table. Sad but also lighter? I told my family I can't give them money anymore, I said. Ah. Mrs. Chen nodded wisely. And how did they respond? Badly. Of course they did. People don't like it when their convenient arrangements are disrupted. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. But how do you feel? I considered the question. Scared. But also, free. Freedom is scary, she agreed. But slavery is worse. That night, I had the best sleep I'd had in months. Deep and dreamless, undisturbed by the anxiety that usually kept me tossing and turning until dawn. I woke refreshed for the first time in years. Monday morning brought a different kind of routine. Instead of immediately calculating how to stretch impossibly thin resources, I made a list of everything I needed to do to take care of myself. Doctor's appointment for my heart medication. Call to the senior center about assistance programs. Trip to the library to research financial planning for people living on fixed incomes. For the first time in years, I was putting myself first on my own list. The week passed quietly. Jessica didn't call. Neither did Tom. Even Emma's usual daily check-in calls stopped coming. The silence hurt, but it also gave me space to think clearly for the first time in years. I met with a counselor at the local senior center, a kind woman named Patricia who specialized in helping elderly people navigate family financial abuse. Yes, she said, what I'd experienced had a name. Financial abuse. Even when it came wrapped in requests for help and guilt about family loyalty. The hardest part, Patricia explained, is that it often comes from the people we love most. The people we most want to help. But help stops being help when it becomes exploitation. Exploitation. Another word I hadn't applied to my situation, but it fit like an uncomfortable shoe I'd been wearing for years without realizing it was 2 sizes too small. Patricia helped me understand my rights. Helped me see that setting financial boundaries wasn't selfish or cruel, it was necessary for my survival. She connected me with legal resources and support groups for seniors dealing with similar situations. For the first time since my husband died, I began to feel like I had allies. 2 weeks after our phone conversation, Jessica showed up at my apartment. She looked tired, stressed, and younger than her 35 years. She stood in my doorway holding Emma's hand, both of them looking uncertain. Hi, Mom, Jessica said carefully. I knelt down to hug my granddaughter, breathing in her familiar scent of shampoo and childhood. I've missed you. Grandma, are you mad at us? Emma asked, her green eyes, so much like mine, wide with worry. No, honey, I'm not mad. I'm just learning how to take better care of myself. Can we come in? Jessica asked. I stepped aside to let them enter my small space. Emma immediately went to the window to look out at the city, the way she always did. Jessica stood awkwardly by the door, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome. I've been thinking about what you said, Jessica began. About not having any money left. And I guess I never really thought about where it all came from. I just assumed you had enough. That you wanted to help. I did want to help. I still want to help. But wanting to help and being able to help are two different things. Jessica sat down at my table, her fingers tracing the scarred surface. Tom thinks we should ask his parents for money instead. What do you think? She was quiet for a long moment. I think I've forgotten how to solve my own problems. Every time something came up, I just called you. And you always said yes. Because I love you. I know. But maybe love isn't supposed to work that way. It was the first time in years that Jessica had acknowledged that our relationship had become unbalanced. The first time she'd taken responsibility for her part in it. Mom, I'm sorry, she said, and I could see tears in her eyes. I'm sorry for taking so much. I'm sorry for not asking how you were doing. I'm sorry for not seeing how much you were sacrificing. I reached across the table and took her hand. Thank you for saying that. Can we try to figure out a different way to do this? A way that doesn't hurt you. I'd like that. Emma tuned into our conversation from her perch by the window. Are you really broke, Grandma? I am, sweetheart. But that's okay. Sometimes being broke helps you figure out what's really important. Is my violin important? I looked at her serious little face, so earnest and worried. Your violin is very important, Emma. But not more important than making sure I can buy food and medicine. She nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 8-year-old brain. Maybe I could take fewer lessons, she suggested. And maybe I could do chores to earn money for the ones I do take. Out of the mouths of babes. My granddaughter had instinctively understood something her parents had forgotten, that everything costs something, and everyone should contribute what they can. Jessica and I spent the next hour talking about practical changes. She would take over her car insurance payments, something she should have done years ago. Emma's activities would be limited to what their family budget could reasonably afford. If they wanted me to contribute to special occasions, they would ask in advance and accept no for an answer. Most importantly, we would start having regular family dinners again, but at my apartment, where the rice pilaf came with love instead of obligation. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments of tension, defensiveness, hurt feelings on both sides. But it was honest in a way our family hasn't been in years. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment feeling something I had almost forgotten: hope. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done since I was a young woman. I went to an art supply store. I bought a small set of watercolors, a pad of paper, and a few brushes. Nothing expensive or fancy. I was still broke, after all. But enough to remember what it felt like to create something for the pure joy of creation. I painted my view from the window. The city skyline at sunset, all golden light and purple shadows. It wasn't very good, my hands were out of practice, and the cheap paints didn't blend the way I remembered. But it was mine. Made for no one but myself, with no purpose but to make something beautiful exist in the world. Mrs. Chen knocked on my door while I was cleaning my brushes. She peered at the painting and smiled. Very nice, she said. You are an artist? I used to be. A long time ago. Artist is not something you used to be. Artist is something you are, always. You just forgot for a while. She was right. I had forgotten. In the years of taking care of everyone else, I had forgotten that I was a person with my own interests, my own talents, my own dreams that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs or expectations. Over the following weeks, I established new routines. Painting in the mornings. Walks in Central Park when the weather was decent. Regular calls with Emma that weren't about logistics or money, just about her life and mine. Occasional dinners with Mrs. Chen and other neighbors I'd never had time to really know when I was constantly managing family crises. I also joined a support group at the senior center. 12 other people, mostly women, who had found themselves in similar situations. Adult children who had learned to see their parents as banks rather than people. Families who confused love with financial support. Parents who had given away their security in the name of helping, only to find themselves worse off and no more appreciated. The stories were heartbreaking and familiar. But there was also strength in that room. People who had learned to set boundaries. People who had rebuilt their lives and their self-respect. People who proved that it was possible to love your family without sacrificing your own well-being. One woman, Helen, became a particular friend. She was 82, sharp as a tack, with white hair she wore in an elegant chignon and a wardrobe that managed to look expensive despite being composed entirely of thrift store finds. Her son had borrowed money from her for years for various business ventures that never quite panned out. Like me, she had eventually found herself broke and taken for granted. The hardest part, Helen told me over coffee one afternoon, was accepting that I had enabled the situation. I kept thinking I was being generous and loving, but I was actually preventing my son from learning to solve his own problems. How did you get them to understand? I stopped explaining and started demonstrating. I stopped giving money and started giving time and attention instead. Turns out that's what he really needed anyway, he just didn't know how to ask for it directly. Helen's son was now financially independent and their relationship was stronger than it had been in years. It gave me hope that Jessica and I might find our way to something similar. The holidays were approaching, and for the first time in years, I wasn't panicked about the expense. I couldn't afford elaborate gifts, but I could afford thoughtful ones. I painted small watercolor cards for everyone, each one unique. For Emma, I found a gentle violin method book at a used bookstore and wrote encouraging notes in the margins. For Jessica, I made a photo album of her childhood, including pictures from our happier times. Christmas dinner was at my apartment. Jessica brought the turkey, not because I couldn't afford it, but because she wanted to contribute. Tom brought wine. Emma brought homemade cookies she'd baked herself. I made the rice pilaf, but this time the saffron was bought with money I could afford to spend. The conversation was different too. Instead of talking around money and obligations, we talked about Emma's progress in school, Jessica's work projects, my painting, Tom's plans to start coaching Little League Baseball. We talked like a family that enjoyed each other's company, not like people fulfilling uncomfortable duties. After dinner, Emma asked to see my paintings. I showed her the small watercolors I'd been working on, city scenes, still lives from my kitchen table, abstract experiments with color and light. "These are really good, Grandma," she said with the kind of uncomplicated enthusiasm only children can muster. "You should sell them." Jessica looked at the paintings more carefully. "Mom, these really are lovely. I had no idea you were so talented." "I've always painted," I said. I just stopped for a while. Why? Because I thought art was selfish. Because every dollar I spent on paints could have gone to someone else's needs. Because I had forgotten that I was allowed to have interests that didn't serve other people. "I guess I got distracted," I said instead. That evening, after they left, I reflected on how different this holiday had felt from previous years. There was less abundance in terms of money spent, but more richness in terms of actual connection. Less obligation and more choice. Less resentment and more genuine affection. I was still broke. That hadn't changed. But I was no longer being broken by my circumstances. I was learning to live within my means while also living as myself. Spring brought new developments. Emma's violin teacher, the affordable one, not the Juilliard instructor, suggested that Emma was ready to audition for the youth orchestra. It was free to participate, funded by grants and donations, and it would give Emma the advanced instruction she needed without bankrupting anyone. Jessica got a promotion at her job, one that came with enough of a salary increase to finally take over the financial responsibilities she should have been handling all along. Tom's business did start to succeed, gradually and with the kind of steady progress that comes from persistence rather than shortcuts. Most importantly, our family relationships started healing. Not because I had resumed my role as the family ATM, but because I had stopped serving that function. Jessica had to learn to budget and plan and make hard choices about priorities. Tom had to find his own solutions to financial challenges instead of assuming someone else would bail him out. Emma learned that wanting something and being able to have it weren't the same thing. These were lessons I should have insisted on years earlier, but it's never too late to start teaching the people you love how to treat you with respect. In May, I had my first art show. Not at a gallery, that was still beyond my means and probably my skill level. But Mrs. Chen organized a small exhibition in the community room of our building. I displayed 20 of my favorite watercolors, and to my amazement, people came. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by to look and comment. 3 paintings sold, not for much money, but for enough to buy better paints and still have groceries for the week. Emma was my most enthusiastic supporter, bringing her friends from school to see her grandmother's art. Jessica helped me hang the paintings and design small price tags. Tom, awkward but trying, complimented my use of color and admitted he'd never known I had artistic talent. The most meaningful moment came when Helen arrived with a small bouquet of flowers and a wide smile. "Look at you," she said, squeezing my hands. "6 months ago you were invisible, even to yourself. Now look at you, an artist with an exhibition." She was right. 6 months ago, I had been disappearing. Not just financially, but as a person. I had become so focused on meeting everyone else's needs that I had forgotten I had any of my own. I had loved others so desperately that I had stopped loving myself at all. The journey from broken to broke but whole hadn't been easy. There were still moments of loneliness, still times when I worried about money, still days when I questioned whether I had done the right thing by setting boundaries with my family. But there were also mornings when I woke up excited to paint. evenings when I looked forward to my own company. Conversations with Emma that were about her interests and mine, not about what I could buy for her. Dinners with Jessica where we talked like friends, not like a creditor and debtor. I was still living on Social Security in a studio apartment, still shopping carefully and choosing generic brands at the grocery store. But I was no longer ashamed of these limitations. I was no longer trying to hide my financial reality or pretend I could afford things I couldn't. Most importantly, I was no longer measuring my worth by how much I could give away. One evening in late summer, I was painting at my kitchen table when Jessica called. Not at 7:30 in the morning with a request, but in the early evening just to talk. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Before, when I called you about money all the time, I don't think I was really calling because I needed the money. No. I think I was calling because I needed to know you still cared about me. But I didn't know how to ask for that directly, so I asked for money instead. And when you gave it to me, I felt like it proved you loved me. But then when I couldn't give any more, I felt like you were withdrawing your love. Even though that's not what was happening at all." It was a moment of insight that took my breath away. All those years of financial requests hadn't really been about money, they had been about connection. But neither of us had understood that at the time. We had created a system where love was confused with financial transactions, where care was measured in dollars rather than attention. "I love you regardless of what I can afford to give you," I said. "I always have. I know that now. But I didn't know it then. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure it out. We both had to learn some hard lessons." "Yeah. But I'm glad we did. Our family is better now, isn't it? More honest." She was right. Our family was better. Not wealthier, not more impressive from the outside, but healthier and more honest. We had learned to have relationships based on affection rather than obligation, on choice rather than habit, on respect rather than assumptions. That night, I worked on a new painting. This one was different from my usual cityscapes and still lives. This one was a self-portrait, something I had never attempted before. I painted myself as I was now, silver-haired and lined, wearing my faded blue cardigan that I had finally accepted I wasn't going to replace anytime soon. But I painted my eyes bright with interest, my hands steady and capable, my expression calm rather than anxious. It wasn't a beautiful painting in any conventional sense. But it was true. It was me as I really was, a woman who had learned the difference between loving others and losing herself. A woman who had found her way back from the edge of invisibility. A woman who was broke but not broken. When I finished the painting, I propped it up on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time. Then I called Helen. "I painted myself," I told her. "And what did you see?" "Someone worth knowing." "Good," she said. "That's the most important painting you'll ever make." As autumn arrived again, marking a full year since my financial crisis had come to a head, I reflected on everything that had changed. I was still living in the same small apartment, still receiving the same Social Security check, still shopping carefully and budgeting for every expense. But I was no longer afraid. I was no longer disappearing. I was no longer apologizing for existing or paying people to tolerate my presence in their lives. Emma's violin lessons continued, but now they were funded by a combination of Jessica's budget, Tom's growing business income, and Emma's own contributions from pet sitting and other age-appropriate jobs. Emma seemed to enjoy her music more when she understood its cost and had invested her own effort in making it possible. Jessica and I had dinner together once a month, sometimes at her place, sometimes at mine. We talked about books and politics and childhood memories. Sometimes we talked about money, but as a practical matter to be managed rather than an emergency to be solved by someone else's sacrifice. Tom had started treating me like a family member rather than a service provider. He asked about my painting, remembered details from our previous conversations, included me in family decisions not because my money was needed but because my opinion was valued. My support group at the senior center had become an important part of my life. I had graduated from seeking help to offering it, mentoring newer members who were just beginning to recognize their own situations. It felt good to help people again, but this time in a way that empowered rather than enabled, that strengthened rather than depleted me. My art had continued to develop. I had moved beyond watercolors to try oils and acrylics. I had joined a painting group that met in Central Park on Sundays. I had even sold a few more pieces, not enough to change my financial situation significantly but enough to buy better supplies and occasionally splurge on a nice dinner with Helen. Most importantly, I had learned to love myself with the same fierce dedication I had always applied to loving others. I had learned that self-care wasn't selfish, that boundaries weren't cruel, that saying no was sometimes the most loving thing you could do. One evening in December, exactly 1 year after that terrible phone conversation when Jessica called me selfish for not being able to pay for Emma's school trip, I was painting by my window when I heard a knock on my door. It was Emma, holding a gift bag and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen in months. "Grandma, I have something for you." Inside the bag was a small picture frame containing a photo of Emma at her violin recital the previous week, an event I had attended not as a financier but as a proud grandmother. Below the photo, Emma had written in her careful cursive, "To Grandma, who taught me that the most important things can't be bought." I hugged her tightly, breathing in her familiar scent and marveling at how much wisdom could fit in such a small person. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "Really? Really? Because it shows me that you understand what matters most. Love? Love. But not just any kind of love. The kind of love that doesn't cost anything but means everything." Jessica appeared in the doorway, having followed Emma upstairs. She looked at the scene, her daughter in my arms, both of us crying happy tears, and smiled. "We brought Chinese takeout," she said. "Are you hungry?" "Starving," I said, wiping my eyes. We spread the containers on my small table and ate with plastic forks, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. No one asked me for money. No one expected me to solve their problems. No one treated me like I was there on borrowed time or conditional approval. I was just Margaret, grandmother, mother, artist, friend. A person with my own life and interests and opinions. A person who mattered not because of what I could provide but because of who I was. Later that evening, after Jessica and Emma had gone home, I sat by my window looking out at the city lights. The same lights I had stared at a year earlier in despair, wondering how I had become so invisible to the people who claimed to love me. Now those same lights looked different. Not like beacons of other people's more successful lives, but like reminders that the city was full of people finding their own ways through complicated circumstances. People learning hard lessons and making difficult choices and figuring out how to love others without losing themselves. I picked up my paintbrush and began working on a new canvas. This one would be my masterpiece, I could feel it. Not because it would be technically perfect or commercially successful, but because it would be completely true. I was painting my story. The story of a woman who gave away everything and discovered that everything wasn't enough. Who learned that love without boundaries becomes exploitation, that generosity without limits becomes martyrdom, that being needed isn't the same as being valued. But most importantly, I was painting the story of a woman who found her way back to herself. Who learned that she was worth more than her bank account balance. Who discovered that the most important relationship in her life was the one she had with herself. As I painted, I thought about everything I wanted to tell people who might be living similar stories. People who had confused love with financial support, who had given away their security in the name of helping others, who had made themselves invisible in service of being indispensable. I wanted to tell them what I had learned, that you can love someone deeply without sacrificing everything for them. That setting boundaries is an act of love, not selfishness. That teaching people to respect you is better than teaching them to use you. I wanted to tell them that it's never too late to remember who you are underneath all the roles you play for other people. That you are allowed to have interests and dreams and limits. That you matter not because of what you can give but because of who you are. Most of all, I wanted to tell them that being broke isn't the same as being broken. That financial poverty doesn't have to mean spiritual poverty. That you can lose everything and still not lose yourself, if you choose not to. The painting grew under my brush, layer by layer, color by color. It showed a woman, me, standing in a small room filled with light. She was alone but not lonely. She was empty-handed but not empty-hearted. She was looking directly at the viewer with eyes that had seen loss and learned wisdom. When I finally set down my brush, hours later, I knew I had created something true. Something that told the story I needed to tell, in a language that transcended words. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected development. Word of my little art exhibition had spread beyond our building. A local coffee shop asked if I would display some paintings in their space. Then a small gallery in the village reached out, asking if I would be interested in participating in a group show featuring older artists who had returned to their craft later in life. I said yes to both opportunities, my heart racing with an excitement I hadn't felt in decades. Even if nothing sold, even if no one noticed, it felt miraculous to have my work seen by strangers who might find something meaningful in it. The coffee shop exhibition opened in January. It was a small space, but my 6 watercolors looked professional hanging on the exposed brick walls between vintage photographs and concert posters. Jessica came to the opening, bringing Emma and even Tom, who spent several minutes studying my painting of the view from my apartment window. "I never realized how beautiful the city looks from your place," he said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he seemed to be really seeing me rather than looking through me. 4 of the 6 paintings sold that first month. People bought them to hang in their homes, to look at every day, to find meaning and beauty in the ordinary moments I had captured with my brush. The money wasn't life-changing, maybe $700 after the coffee shop's commission, but it represented something much more valuable than its dollar amount. It represented proof that I had something to offer the world beyond my willingness to empty my bank account for other people's convenience. It represented validation that my perspective, my skill, my creativity had value independent of my usefulness to my family. It represented hope that there might be other sources of income, other ways to contribute, other paths forward than the narrow one I had been traveling. The group show at the gallery was scheduled for April. 3 months to prepare new work, to push myself beyond the safe subjects I had been painting, to create something that truly represented who I was becoming rather than who I had always been. I spent those months in a kind of creative fever. I painted early in the morning before the city woke up. I painted in the afternoons when the light slanted through my window just right. I painted on weekends when the sounds of families enjoying time together drifted up from the street below. I painted my hands counting pills at my kitchen table, a meditation on resourcefulness and acceptance. I painted the empty spaces in my refrigerator arranged like a still life, a commentary on scarcity that somehow felt abundant rather than lacking. I painted the faces of the women in my support group, each one a portrait of resilience and hard-won wisdom. And I painted my memories. The dance lessons I had worked 3 jobs to pay for when Jessica was young. The tiny apartment we had shared when I was newly divorced and terrified. The moment I had held my first grandchild and felt a love so fierce it scared me. The day I realized I had confused loving with giving until I had nothing left to give. Helen visited my apartment one afternoon while I was working on a particularly challenging piece, a painting of my bankbook open to the last entry, the one that showed zero balance, surrounded by blooming flowers to represent the growth that had come from acknowledging the truth of my situation. "You've become fearless," she observed, studying the canvas. "A year ago, you wouldn't have dared to be this honest about your circumstances." She was right. A year ago, I had been so ashamed of my financial situation that I would have done anything to hide it, even from myself. Now I was putting that shame on display, transforming it into something that might help other people feel less alone in their own struggles. "What changed?" Helen asked. "I stopped being afraid of being seen as I really am," I said. "It turns out that being seen, even if what people see isn't perfect, is better than being invisible." The gallery opening in April was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The space was larger than I had expected, with white walls and polished concrete floors that made the artwork feel important, significant. My 7 pieces were arranged in one corner, part of a larger exhibition that included the work of 15 other artists who had all found or returned to their creative voices later in life. Emma wore her best dress and carried herself with the serious dignity of someone attending a very important event. Jessica had taken time off work to be there. Tom brought his parents, who seemed genuinely impressed by the quality and emotional depth of the work. Even Mrs. Chin came, wearing a formal black dress I had never seen before and beaming with pride as if I were her own daughter. But the moment that took my breath away came when a young woman, probably in her 20s, approached me near the painting of my empty pantry shelves. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the artist who painted this?" I nodded, suddenly nervous about what she might say. "I wanted to thank you," she continued. "I've been supporting my family financially for years, and it's bankrupted me emotionally and financially. But I never told anyone because I was ashamed. Seeing this painting, knowing that someone else has been where I am, it makes me feel less alone." She gave me her phone number and asked if I knew about any support groups for people in similar situations. I connected her with Patricia at the senior center, extending the chain of help that had saved my own life just over a year earlier. 3 of my paintings sold that night. More than that, though, they were seen by dozens of people who spent time looking at them, thinking about them, finding their own meanings in the stories I had tried to tell with color and light. The local newspaper sent a reviewer who wrote about the exhibition with particular attention to what she called the unflinching honesty of Margaret Chen's portraits of financial elder abuse. I had never thought of my work in those terms, but seeing the phrase in print felt like validation that the personal truly could be political, that individual stories could illuminate larger social problems. Spring turned to summer, and my life settled into new rhythms that felt sustainable rather than desperate. I painted most mornings, took long walks in Central Park in the afternoons, and spent evenings reading or visiting with neighbors or talking on the phone with Emma about her progress in the youth orchestra. Jessica and I had established a monthly tradition of cooking dinner together in my apartment, both of us contributing ingredients and ideas, both of us cleaning up together afterward. Our conversations had deepened beyond logistics and emergencies to include our dreams, our fears, our memories of the past and hopes for the future. Tom had surprised me by asking if I would teach him to paint. His business was doing well enough that he had time for hobbies again, and he said that seeing my work had made him curious about the creative process. We met every other Saturday morning, setting up easels by my window and working side by side while Emma practiced violin in the background. It was during one of these painting sessions that Tom said something that changed how I understood everything that had happened. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," he said, not looking up from the canvas where he was struggling with the proportions of a coffee cup. "For what?" "For treating you like a bank instead of a person. For assuming that because you were generous, we could take advantage of that generosity indefinitely." He paused, wiping yellow paint from his brush. "I think I was afraid that if we didn't need your money, you might not want to be part of our family anymore." It was the kind of insight that could have made me angry if I hadn't already done the work of processing my own role in creating the dynamics that had nearly destroyed our relationships. Instead, it made me sad for all the years we had wasted on transactions when we could have been building genuine connections. "I understand," I said. "I think I was afraid of the same thing, that if I stopped being useful, you might not want me around." That was never true. I know that now. But I didn't know it then. We painted in comfortable silence for a while, both of us absorbed in the meditative work of mixing colors and making marks that gradually resolved into recognizable shapes. Emma's violin scales provided a soundtrack that felt like the sound of competence being built note by careful note. The one-year anniversary of my financial breaking point arrived in November. I marked it not with sadness but with a small personal celebration. I bought myself a bouquet of flowers, not expensive ones, but fresh and beautiful, and made myself a proper dinner with ingredients I could afford without anxiety. I opened a bottle of wine that had been a gift from a neighbor who bought one of my paintings. I had survived the hardest year of my life and come out the other side not just intact but transformed. I had learned that losing everything could be the beginning of finding yourself, that saying no could be more loving than saying yes, that being enough for yourself was the foundation for being genuinely available to others. As winter approached, I received an email that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. A small publishing company that specialized in memoirs by older women wanted to know if I would be interested in writing a book about my experience with family financial abuse and recovery. They had seen the newspaper article about my art exhibition and thought my story might help other people in similar situations. I said yes, though I had never written anything longer than a grocery list. The advance wasn't large, but it was enough to cover several months of expenses while I worked on the manuscript. More importantly, it represented another way to transform my pain into something useful, to ensure that the hardest lessons I had learned might spare someone else from having to learn them the same way. Writing the book was harder than painting had ever been. Painting allowed for metaphor, for abstraction, for leaving some things unsaid. Writing required me to be specific, to name names, to confront the exact details of how I had enabled my own exploitation and the specific steps I had taken to reclaim my life. But it was also healing in ways I hadn't expected. Putting the story in order, finding the narrative thread that connected all the painful moments to the gradual awakening that followed, helped me see my journey as a coherent whole rather than a series of random crises and recoveries. Emma helped me with the computer aspects of writing, showing me how to save documents and print drafts with the patience of a 12-year-old who has grown up with technology. She also served as my first reader, offering feedback with the kind of brutal honesty only a child can provide. "Grandma," she said after reading the first chapter, "this is really sad. But also kind of inspiring? Like, you were sad but then you got better." "That's exactly right, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to get really sad before we can figure out how to get better." "Is that why you started painting again?" "Partly. Painting helped me remember that I was a person with my own interests, not just someone who existed to solve other people's problems." Emma considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important topics. "I'm glad you remembered. Your paintings are beautiful, and they make me proud to be your granddaughter." It was the kind of compliment that would have made me cry a year earlier, but now it simply filled me with quiet satisfaction. I had become the kind of grandmother who could be a source of pride not because of what she could buy but because of who she was and what she created. The book was published the following spring, 18 months after I had first picked up a paintbrush and remembered who I used to be before I forgot how to be myself. The launch party was held in the same coffee shop where I had first displayed my paintings, bringing everything full circle in a way that felt meaningful rather than coincidental. Media attention was modest but positive. I did interviews on local radio shows and wrote essays for websites that focused on senior issues and family relationships. The book found its audience slowly but steadily, people who had lived similar stories, adult children who recognized themselves in Jessica's journey, professionals who worked with seniors facing financial abuse. Most importantly, it connected me with other women who had traveled similar paths. I received letters from readers who thanked me for making them feel less alone, who shared their own stories of learning to set boundaries with adult children, who had found the courage to seek help after reading about my experience. One letter particularly moved me. It came from a 73-year-old woman named Dorothy who lived in a small town in Ohio. "Dear Margaret," she wrote, "I have been lending money to my son for 20 years, and I am now facing bankruptcy at an age when I should be secure. I thought I was alone in this situation and that it was too late to change anything. Your book showed me that it's never too late to save yourself, even if it means disappointing people you love. I am meeting with a financial counselor next week to figure out how to get my life back. Thank you for showing me the way." Letters like Dorothy's reminded me why I had been willing to expose my own pain so publicly. If my mistakes could prevent someone else from making the same ones, if my recovery could inspire someone else to begin their own, then everything I had been through had served a purpose beyond my own healing. 2 years after the night I discovered my savings account was empty, I was featured in a magazine article about women who had reinvented themselves after age 70. The photographer came to my apartment and captured me painting at my kitchen table, surrounded by canvases and art supplies, my hands steady and confident, my expression focused and serene. The article talked about my art, my book, and my advocacy work with seniors facing financial abuse. But what struck me most about seeing my story in print was the description of me as a woman who chose to see her breaking point as her turning point. That phrase stayed with me. How many people, I wondered, were living at their breaking points right now, unable to imagine that those same breaking points could become turning points if they found the courage to change direction? I thought about the version of myself who had sat in this same apartment 2 years earlier, staring at an empty bank statement and feeling like her life was over. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her that her life wasn't ending, it was finally about to begin. That the worst day would become the first day, if she could find the strength to stop pretending that giving everything away was the same as giving everything she had to offer. As my 79th birthday approached, I reflected on all the ways my world had expanded since I had learned to contract my financial commitments to match my actual resources. I had more friends now than I had ever had. I had creative pursuits that brought me daily joy. I had family relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial convenience. I had purpose that went beyond my own survival to include helping others find their way out of similar situations. Most importantly, I had recovered my sense of self. I knew who I was apart from my roles as mother, grandmother, and financial resource. I knew what I valued, what I enjoyed, what I would and would not do. I knew my boundaries and I enforced them with love rather than anger. On my birthday, Jessica organized a small party at my apartment. Emma played violin, Tom brought champagne, Mrs. Chen made her famous dumplings, and Helen brought flowers from her garden. We crowded around my small table, sharing food and stories and laughter that felt genuine rather than obligatory. At the end of the evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat by my window looking out at the city lights that had once seemed like symbols of other people's success and now felt like a constellation of possibilities, each light representing a life being lived, a story being written, a person finding their own way through the complexity of loving others without losing themselves. I picked up my current painting, a street scene from my neighborhood that captured the energy and diversity and endless possibility of urban life, and added a few final touches. The painting was almost finished, and like all my work now, it told a story of resilience, of finding beauty in unexpected places, of the quiet triumph of choosing to see clearly rather than looking away. I called the painting Enough. Because after 78 years of living, I had finally learned the most important lesson of all: I was enough. Not because of what I could do for others, not because of what I could afford to give, not because of how useful I could be. Just because I was me. Just because I existed. Just because I had chosen, finally, to value myself as much as I valued everyone else. And that was not just enough, it was everything. Have you ever found yourself giving away so much of yourself that you forgot who you were underneath all that generosity? Have you ever loved someone so desperately that you lost yourself in the process? Tell me in the comments below. Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else who's struggling with the same painful choice between love and self-respect. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me reach other people who need to hear that they're worth more than what they can give away. That they deserve to be loved for who they are, not what they can provide. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone in having learned these hard lessons. And thank you for being part of a community that believes love should lift people up, not wear them down. Until next time, remember, you are enough. You have always been enough. And it's never too late to start believing.